climate change, contributing to a shift in how accountability is framed internationally. While these processes are complex, they are carry significantly implications for vulnerable countries and communities you will likely report on. One of the key challenges before us is bridging the gaps between global climate negotiations and local realities that our people are facing. Decisions made in international forums must be translated into stories that resonate with our ordinary citizens at local level. This is very key for us. This is where your work becomes essential for people, making global commitment meaningful and relevant at the community level. At the same time, colleagues, we recognize the challenges you face. Reporting on climate change often means working under constraints, limited time, space, and resources. It also increasingly involves navigating misinformation issues, climate denial, and at the same time, backlash. Despite this, your continued commitment to truth, accuracy, and integrity remains vital for media people. Colleagues, this webinar is both timely and necessary, I said before. It seeks to strengthen our ability to report on climate science and policy with clarity and confidence, to frame stories through a climate justice lens, and to ask critical questions that promote accountability. It also aims to support you in navigating the evolving landscape of climate discourse while maintaining journalists' independence. As we move forward, colleagues, I encourage you to continue telling stories that matter on climate change, of course, stories that reflect the lived experience of our communities, that amplify voices from the front lines, and that challenge us all to act with urgency and also responsibilities. As the LDC group, we value the media as a key partner in advancing climate action and climate justice. Your work is essential in ensuring that the realities of our countries are seen, understood, and acted upon all levels. I wish you a productive and engaging session, and I look forward to insights and outcomes that will emerge from this very important exchange and training. I thank you very much. And back.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for your words. That was really great. It really set the stage for what we have coming up. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us. We know you're very busy in your meetings. And yes, this meeting is being recorded. We will be sharing the recording with everyone afterwards. And we hope to continue the conversation going as we get going. All right, next on the agenda is actually me, and I have some slides to share. As I said before, my name is Jabal Hassan Ali. I'm a communications consultant with Climate Analytics. I'm not a journalist, but I respect the work you all do so greatly. I think it's one of the most noblest professions in the world when done correctly. You have so much responsibility. So your biggest fan right here. And let me share my screen so I could get because I have a few slides. So just give me a second, bear with me. Are you all seeing my screen? I'm assuming that's a yes.
Yes, sure.
Okay, great. All right, so the purpose of my little presentation is just to really, we did a similar session to this in the Caribbean. It was specifically focused on the Caribbean. It went really well. It was a live event. We had journalists from all over the region. In Trinidad, it was a hybrid event. And we thought that a lot of the takeaways from that session is very useful to do other SIDS as well as LDCs because there's such a shared history and in terms of how climate change is affecting us all in the most vulnerable regions. So I'm just doing basically a primer about what happened there, and I think in sharing those reflections, our panelists can really take that and run with it and show where things might be different, where things might be very similar, and really just get the conversation going, as I said. So the global state of play. This is what the science says right now for us. 1.5 is not just a number, it's our right to exist. We have the guardrail in place, reaffirming that this is what is needed. This was recently backed up by the ICJ opinion that 1.5 is the target that we need to reach in order to protect the most vulnerable and the existential threat that SIDS and LDCs face from climate change. But currently, the ambition gap is a lot greater. We are not on track to meet this target, and we are tracking towards a dangerous overshoot. And the next 4 years is pretty critical in order for us to really make correct course and make that change. Right now, at the most optimistic scenario, if countries do what they say they're going to do, we had an overshoot of about 1.9 degrees, and that's just being very optimistic that they actually do what they say they're doing. Current policies and actions, we're still in the 2-degree range. Every year has been hotter than the rest. I think the last few years has been at 1.5 degrees. And so the timing is very close. We have a little bit of time to really change things. And the media's role is so important in helping get that message out there in terms of where we're at. And I think that a lot of the status quo tries to question the science and they use misinformation. I think it's really media's job to really show that this is the science that is saying this. The IPCC panel of scientists, there's thousands of scientists worldwide who volunteer to act as peer reviewing this information. This is not conjecture. This is the settled scientific consensus, and it's a multi-year process. And I think we really depend on the media to bolster that the veracity and the importance of this information and how correct it is. And to face this all sorts of misinformation. And I think the scientific procedure and the journalistic procedure has similarities in that it is a long, in order to be responsible, it is a long process. It takes time. And in today's fast-paced world where there's significant drawbacks to maintaining that approach. It makes you slower, it makes you less able to stand out in a sea of clickbait and unverified opinion out there. So what I would say is that you need to stay the course in terms of being responsible because you can't fight misinformation when more misinformation. It's very important that you stick to your process. But what maybe we can do better is how these two groups interact with each other. How do you help each other, the scientists and the journalists? We need you all to really support the scientific community highlight the implications of this information as best as possible, make it interesting and real for folks. I think that's really the job of the media, and stay consistent in your messaging, and championing science. I think that's the only way we could go past this stage we're in. Moving on to climate justice. A lot of you may already know this, living it. SIDS and LDCs contribute less than 5% of global emissions, but SIDS is less than 1%. LDCs, there's a way more population, so it is like 3%. But we face 100% of the existential risk. And there's a economic injustice at play, because a lot of the biggest contributors of this problem, they were able to get their economies going where they needed to be by doing this, and we are suffering the consequences. And I think these two graphs kind of just exemplify that. It shows the red is in the first graph is gigatons being produced, and as you can see, the global north dominates in terms of historical emissions. And then on the flip side, when you look at the other graph in terms of vulnerability, the red, you see a lot of red around the global south as well. Well, you can't see the islands, but all those dots are red. And the people who are contributing the least to the problem are suffering the most. So I just had these two graphs just to really demonstrate that. There's an economic injustice to this. Hurricanes are getting stronger and stronger every year. They can cost a nation over 60% of their annual GDP, even more. In this era of superstorms we're in, there was Dorian in Bahamas, Melissa recently in Jamaica. It hits us really hard. We're not pausing this, and we're paying for it in ways that our economies can't recover, because it just puts us in a vicious cycle of debt. Another factor, LDCs account for 69% of the worldwide deaths from climate-related disasters over the last 50 years. So I think as important it is to highlight that these events are happening, we also need to move from just highlighting that they are happening and that our regions need help, but that it's unfair as well. It's we have to move from charity narratives to justice narratives. I think we do the first part really well. We need to start doing the second part more. It's very important to highlight this. This slide was just to show some of the innovation that's taking place in our regions. That's the other side of the story that needs to be told. It's very important that we tell this side of the story. We are not just vulnerable, we're valuable. We are the front lines, and being on the front lines forces us to be innovative in terms of finding solutions. We can't wait for the rest of the world. And these solutions filter to the rest of the world, and they're able to scale it up. And it's very important as part of that job, because when you're on the front lines and you're just being as ingenious as possible, it's impossible to communicate that as well. So it's very important for the media to find these stories. They can't depend on the people doing this good work to be able to tell it as well. We need the media help in terms of highlighting and demonstrating the great stuff that people are doing in our regions all over the world, and that helps in terms of scaling it up afterwards. Some examples that were pointed out in the Caribbean, for example, we had the CCRIF, which stands for let me find it. The Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, which was the first of its kind globally, the first scheme of its kind, and it's working really well, but it needs to be scaled up. It helped in the aftermath of Melissa, for example, because Jamaica took out those policies very, very early. They were paid out very, very early. The system works well, but the amounts that it pays out, it still dwarfs in terms of what is actually needed. So similarly, we had the Bridgetown Initiative in Barbados, Prime Minister Mia Mottley. And these are the success stories that were actually told, but there's many more that's not been told. Barbados is the first to really champion debt pause clauses when there's natural disasters and other really things that financial innovations that the rest of the world is standing up and taking notice on. And also in the Caribbean, we are really pioneering in terms of nature-based solutions and using mangroves and coral reefs as our first line of defense. So that narrative of shift of showing our agency is very important for journalists to tackle. This just highlights something. We were the cause for the 1.5 guardrail, and the media played a very important role in that. SIDS were the ones who really pushed this through on the global stage. The smallest voice in negotiations, but we the moral voice, and it rang the loudest. But it couldn't work without the engine of the campaign, which was the media. And your coverage creates a political space for these vulnerable states who have unequal diplomatic power to negotiate and really get that into the agreement and be heard on the multilateral stage. So it's just an example of how the two works together. On to the ICJ advisory opinion. The world's highest court has now clarified that states have a legal duty to prevent climate harm, and we in the media needs to use this as well. People often ask, what does that mean? Like, because some countries, especially in today's world, as we become more multipolarized, how important is this opinion? It's still very important because I think there's still enough countries out there who know that if you ignore this opinion, you risk destabilizing the whole system. It's such a powerful statement of the symbol of this court is so important that countries have to take heed to it. And yes, why technically some might say they don't want to listen to the opinion. At the end of the day, it's a dangerous road if you go down that road. So I think it's as a framing of normative pressure, it's very important. And journalists can use that now in their reporting in terms of as a sort of shield of objectivity, because the highest court of the land is set a legal opinion now that climate change is happening. 1.5 degree is the agreed temperature limit. Climate action must be so. These are some of the key takeaways on the court. Climate action must be grounded in science. So the reports of the IPC, the judgment, the opinion actually said it represents the best available science. Another important takeaway is that every state has the obligation to act with stringent due diligence, and the failure to do so mean that it constitutes an internationally wrongful act. Developed states have an obligation to provide financial resources to assist with developing states. So all of this has been endorsed and accepted by the court. And I think just as important as going forward, this opinion, also the story of this opinion is very important. It was really pushed again by the most vulnerable countries, those most vulnerable regions, SIDS, LDCs, the Pacific, and young people as well. Pacific students from Vanuatu took this all the way to the court, and they won it unanimously, and that is an amazing story that needs to be shared. The last thing I would say about the ICJ advisory opinion, it's not done in a vacuum. It goes outside of the COP process, and it makes it clear that let me find the exact wording. It extends beyond climate treaties, and it is related to climate change under other multilateral environmental agreements, human rights law, and customary international law. So even if you're not a party to climate agreements, you are bound to this action because you have a duty to prevent significant harm to the environment and a duty to cooperate for the protection of the environment in line of these principles of good faith. So it goes beyond the climate COP decisions themselves, and if a party is party to it or not. So just to wrap up, some practical tips, which of course the experts on our panel will really drive home more and give you a better sense. we need to use the principles of justice to find the hidden beats. It's not just reporting on weather anymore or the climate impacts. We need to find these stories across all sectors that climate change is affecting, and we're increasingly seeing the evidence of how it's affecting us. We need to find the stories in health, in food security. It's happening all around us. And we need to highlight the justice angle of it going forward. So I think that's my wrap up there. And I think Matthews is here as well, our moderator. So he will take it from here in terms of the next presenter. Thank you. Matthews, are you with us now?
Sure. Thank you so much indeed, Jabbar, for that great presentation. Quite interesting, inspiring at the same time. So maybe I had an issue, so that's why I joined late. A bit of apologies, but now we can proceed. I think to invite the next speaker. So at this point in time, perhaps allow me to say that we'll have a moment of, for example, Q&A towards the end of the webinar. So if you have got some questions, of course, some of them you can already drop them in the chat if you want. But we'll create some time where you can also come in. I'm not too sure. Chris Kambani, if you are ready with your presentation so that you can come in. Otherwise, we are ready for you. So Chris Kambani is the head of Natural Resources Department at the Lilongwe University of Agriculture and Natural Resources.
You all hear me?
In Malawi. Yeah, yes, Chris, we can hear you. Let me know if you can do it in 5 minutes. Thank you. You have the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Matthews and Jabbar. And like Matthews said, my name is Chris Kambanda, and I'm from Lilongwe University of Agriculture and Natural Resources, specifically the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. So I'm going to talk about climate justice, translating principles into stories. My first line in terms of climate justice is, I think the issue is not about climate justice. I think the issue is about climate injustice, because climate justice is a solution. And to kickstart my small presentation, I'm going to talk about a 53-year-old grandmother who is also a farmer in Isanje, who in 2022 had maize crop completely destroyed 2 weeks before harvest. And her child could not go to school for 4 months, find work, so they had to go to Mozambique to find a job. And as a grandmother, she had this to say. In my local language, it says, "Antu akudzikola lina alindi dzikola tu mimba mwao," meaning to say that people of the other countries carry our land inside their stomachs, literally. This is how serious people are affected by climate injustices. And this is the central moral claim of climate justice. And so in order for us to understand climate justice, we must first of all understand climate injustice. Next slide, please. Right, so climate justice is the moral and political claim that the climate crisis is not merely an environmental problem, but rather it's a profound injustice shaped by history, power, and inequality, and therefore demanding responses that address those root conditions. So we're talking about historical happenings, things that happened a long time ago, but are affecting us today. But in that historical context, there are people that are responsible, countries that are more responsible than others. And in terms of climate policy, the understanding is that climate change is caused by greenhouse gas emissions from human activity, and therefore we must reduce emissions to limit the warming. And again, nations should transition to clean energy so that we can reduce impacts for everyone. The government must negotiate. That's what policy says. But in terms of climate justice, it is caused primarily by wealthy nations, whereas poorest countries suffer the most. And therefore, if we have to address this, if we have to address this already done harm, we must look at adaptation, compensation, and reparation. And this has to be done by those that are responsible for causing the climate crisis. And in terms of transition, we must be fair, not build on exploiting mineral-rich poor countries, and so on and so on. Can you go to the next slide, please? And just to talk a little bit about the origins of climate justice. We can't talk about climate justice without talking about environmental justice. And that's the movement that started way back in the 1980s in the United States. And borrowing from the 17 principles of environmental justice, a number of NGOs, civil society organizations met in Bali in 2002 and also came up with 27 principles of climate justice, and where climate change is it was decided that climate change is a rights issue, where polluters must pay and affected communities must lead. And it went on in 2011, where the Mary Robinson Foundation also had declared that climate justice is a human rights issue, and therefore there must be fairness in burden sharing and support for vulnerable nations. And all this debate led to the Paris Agreement, in which at the moment we're talking about common but differentiated responsibility and loss and damage, indigenous rights, which are embedded in civil society pressure. So all these things have been happening over the years, and today we are still talking about the same climate justice. There's a reason why we're talking about climate justice. The next slide, please. Yeah, we're talking about climate justice because climate change is a human rights issue. And climate change is already violating established human rights, not just here in Malawi, but across the globe. And when we talk about human rights, we're looking at threats to right to life, right to food and water, right to health, right to healthy environment, the right to self-determination, and rights of the future generations, and so on and so on. All these rights are threatened as a result of the climate crisis. And this crisis has led to the development of dimensions of climate justice, the responses or the principles of climate justice. And climate justice is not a single idea, it is a cluster of related principles, each addressing a different dimension of how the climate crisis intersects with the justice. And we are looking at about almost six different principles of climate justice, starting with who bears the cost, and that is distributive justice. Who decides? Whose knowledge counts? And who is accountable for the harm that has been done? We're also talking about the rights of the future and the role of women intersection into climate justice. And I'm going to go through each one of them so that we understand what these 6 dimensions of climate justice mean. So the core idea with respect to distributive justice is people and nations should bear climate burdens proportional to their contribution to the crisis. Where this is violated, redistribution and compensation are required. This is the core idea of distributive justice. Who bears the cost? At the moment, developing countries, including Malawi, are contributing much less. Malawi, for instance, contributes 0.001 as little as 0.0016% to the global greenhouse gas emissions. It is also one of the top 10 most vulnerable countries globally. And it is projected that by 2050, the decrease will be 9% in terms of projected GDP by 2050. And it is also projected that an additional 1.3 million additional people will be pushed into poverty by 2050. So all these are happening in developing countries. And Malawi, this is the current situation. In 2023, for instance, a case study of Nsanje, there was one of the most tragic cyclones that happened in this country, which is Cyclone Freddy. And during that period, a lot of families lost their lives, lost their property, and as a country, we spent almost $5 million US. And so, as a country, we're spending a lot of money trying to respond to climate injustices. Instead of focusing on other development activities, we are focusing on the effects of climate change done by other developed countries.
Sorry, Chris. If you can consider winding up in the next 2 minutes.
All right.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, can you move to the next slide? So we're also talking about procedural and justice of who decides and whose knowledge counts. Can you just walk through the slides, because I have a couple of slides, and then we're talking about restorative and intergenerational justice, which also includes gender justice. And we're looking at those who that have caused the harm must bear the responsibility, and the rest of the future generations must also be taken into consideration. And considering that women constitute 70% of Malawi's smallholder farmers, they must also be considered in our decision. Next, please. So I think I've already talked about this. Just go to the next slide. Yeah, so what is the legal framework with respect to climate justice in Malawi? And I'm talking about this legal framework because this is now where, as a country, our reporters, our journalists, even the media should also look into, because while at the international level things are happening, also at national level we must also be cautious. So in terms of the legal framework, Malawi has the necessary legal framework within which civil society, the media can work. Take, for instance, the Constitution, the Malawi Constitution, the Environmental Management Act, the Disaster Management Act. All these are frameworks that have been developed for the country to respond to climate injustice. Next. Yeah, just I'll go to the last slide. Yeah, so to cut the long story short, this is what is demanded. Just the previous slide. This is what is demanded on climate justice. At the international community, we are demanding that those that are responsible should give resources to developing countries, because they are the ones that are being affected. And we're demanding that loss and damage be funded. We're demanding that a priority should be given to mitigation and adaptation. At the national level, we are demanding the enforcement of Environmental Management Act and a lot more other things. For instance, in the mine sector, and one of the major issues I think that we have in this country is mining, which is bringing a lot of environmental challenges. And the Kairekera project is a very good example in which after the project there have been reports of a lot of pollution that was left unaided or mining company. At the moment, we are looking at yet another longer, and that is
Okay.
affecting people. Because
I think you're also breaking a bit now, Chris. We can hardly
perpetrated
hear
by
what.
companies that come from made a lot of in terms of affecting our economies. So the call is to us all, civil society, the media, to go out there and get that information out, because without the information getting out, we wouldn't actually know how this crisis is affecting the local people. We wouldn't know how the crisis is affecting the locals in Nsanje, in Ichikwawa, and other districts in this country. And Malawi is just one example. There are other countries that are also being affected across the southern region. So climate justice basically will not be won in a single conference or a single law or with a single movement. Little by little, the documented stories of women in Nsanje, in report written by students, either in Nzoni or MAST or UNIMA, in customary forest organized in districts, all these are going to contribute to making our environment clean and making sure that the injustices that we face are going to be dealt with. So in short, that's what I wanted to indicate, that understanding of the principles and going down on the ground and getting stories that are linked to the principles of climate justice is the way forward to make sure that we are responding to climate justice. Thank you.
No, thank you very much indeed, Chris, for that wonderful presentation. Very insightful. I wish you had more time, but we do really appreciate for taking your time to prepare, but also share with us. And quickly, we move on to the next session, having finalized our first session. And in this second session, basically, we'll be hearing from the people we can also always consider as boots on the ground, the people that are telling these stories, the people that are interacting with our communities every day, just to understand their reporting experiences. And we'll start with Nanette, who is going to make a very short presentation, max 5 minutes as well. And then I'll invite Estacio Valoi, who is also an investigative journalist, a little later. And he's from Mozambique. He'll also make a very short presentation. Our final speaker, as per the schedule, will be Nick, who is an AFP correspondent. So over to you, Nanette. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for having me here today. Kia ora. My name is Nanette, and I'm from the Cook Islands in the Pacific Islands region. I was a reporter. I now work for the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environment Program. And I think I want to go back, and sorry, I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. I'm just here to share a little bit about our experiences.
Sure, that
my
is very
experience.
fine. Thank you.
So if I go back maybe 20 years ago, in 2005, I was a reporter in the Cook Islands, and at that period, we experienced 6 tropical cyclones in the space of 6 weeks. Several of those were Category 5 cyclones. And before that, my people, me as a community, me as a news reporter, had heard about climate change, but that was it. We didn't know anything further. I mean, these were the days we didn't have internet like we do now. We were still using faxes, we had dial-up. So we were experiencing these things, and we were hearing people saying this is because of climate change. But we actually didn't know what it was, what it meant, how it started. And we were learning that this was one of many of our experiences as a Pacific Islands person that was the impact of climate change. The other was that we were noticing that our lands were being washed away. The waves were coming higher and higher. The high tide mark was moving up more and more. We're losing more of our land, but we still didn't know that that was because of climate change. It wasn't until the cyclones happened and then we realized, goodness me, this is because of climate change. So as a reporter, it was really hard personally because we had to tell people's stories with respect. We were talking to people lost livelihoods with all their crops gone and so forth, and they were trying to rebuild. And every time they just get over the cyclone, in a few days, there's like another tropical depression, and that comes into a cyclone, and then that comes past our way again. So we really took a lot of a real battering that time, but it kind of really grew our awareness as a country as to what climate change was and what it could possibly mean for our future. So one of the things that really made me learn as a reporter was that I couldn't just say this is climate change. I learned that you needed science behind this. And like I said, this was pre-internet. Like, we didn't have climate change and encyclopedias in those days. We had to go to people that were those who were the point of reference, who had all this knowledge. And at that time, we were still fairly new in the UNFCCC process. We didn't have the climate experts that we have today. So at that point, everybody was still learning. And it was a really interesting time to be in as a reporter in a small islands developing state. And one thing that it really made me learn was, we needed to learn more. So from that, I started a new position with an organization. It's a regional organization, and it's an intergovernmental one in which all our Pacific Island members are a part of. There's 21 Pacific Island governments that are a part of this. And we work together there to help empower our Pacific Islands media and grow their awareness as to what climate change was, how they could tell stories, authentic stories from Pacific voices in a respectful and dignified manner. We also did work to encourage that news about climate change remain consistent, that it doesn't just happen every time there's an extreme weather event, that while it remains newsworthy, we don't sensationalize people's problems or the impacts or the things that were happening to them. And that took a lot of work. The other thing that we learned, and I don't know if it's the same for where you are or your workplace, is that in the Pacific Islands, you have one reporter possibly covering 3 different things: sports, politics, as well as maybe told to cover a 100th birthday. And so we're in this space where they're going to be able to absorb the information about climate change, as well as relay these stories factually. So what we set about doing was, first of all, developing resources, some quick stop guides, posters in the newsroom, so people would see 5 key facts about climate change, what it is, how it will affect you. And we based all of this upon science. We tried to make it easy because not all of us have the time to read. First of all, learn how to read an IPCC report and then translate all of that information so that our audiences will understand. So we set about doing those things. And then we also started taking reporters to the UNFCCC processes themselves so they could experience that all of the decisions being made up at this global level was in fact slowly or impacting us in our homes. And we tried to bridge that together. We also did a lot of work to bridge the relationships between and the networks between those with all the technical experience, as well as the reporters, so that they know who they could go to. What we find in this day and age with the internet is that one of our biggest problems, and again, I don't know if this is one that you face as a reporter or journalist, is that there's so much information out there. What information is correct? Which information do you quote? Which information do you use to ground your news? And so we tried to bring more. We're doing more work at the moment. We're currently developing what we call a fact bank so that our Pacific reporters can go to one place online and have the information that they know is credible and that they can quote and they can use to ground their stories, as well as Pacific perspectives around that. So that's something that we're working on, because we find that this is what you need when you're told to do so many different things one day, to be able to do it. The other big thing that is a big big concern for us is we used to hear when I first started in this space is dumb the language down. Tell it to us like I'm a 6-year-old. Tell it to me like I'm an 8-year-old. But what we're learning in this day and age is that climate change is affecting everybody. It's changing the way that our future generations are going to live. It's rewriting the legacy that we're going to have is not what we built ourselves upon. So what we're doing is we're making sure that we're encouraging for when our reporters, our media, when they tell stories, to teach our audience as well. Don't use acronyms, don't break things down. We have to raise the understanding and the awareness up of our audiences, especially in the Pacific, because what's happening is happening to them in the houses. We cannot say anymore that we won't experience it because we've been on the front lines of climate change for many, many years. And we need to learn this issue. So what we do now is we try and encourage just that repetition. Whenever you use a term, whenever you explain something, that there's a little bit of learning in this space as well. The other thing that we also do is we want to really encourage our reporters to be consistent in telling authentic Pacific stories. And by that, we don't mean we have experts from outside coming in and telling us what it is that we're feeling and why. We actually have our own people explain why their traditional knowledge is being changed, why the land that they live on is no longer there and they've had to relocate. And in relocating, they can no longer be these skills that they grew up with of feeding their family by being a good fisherman. They're taken away from the coast and they now have to readjust their whole lifestyle, relearn everything, so they become planters. So there's all these things that we would like our own Pacific people to tell, but not just nationally or regionally across the country. We also need to take these stories beyond to the rest of the world because again, the internet, we compete with so much information out there. We compete with other issues out there. And what we really need to do is make sure that our voices, they echo across the world. Because if we're not going to tell our stories and if we're not going to try and encourage people to listen to us, nobody will listen to us. And the problem there is that when no one hears us or sees us, they forget about us. And that's what we can't have. So I just want to wrap up by saying I applaud all of you media here. I know your work can sometimes be a thankless one. It's not always well paid, but I want to say keep on going. I think what you're doing now is a great job, and I know you can do better by helping to tell our Pacific stories or even our climate change stories as LDCs and SIDS, so that people hear us, they resonate, and we hope that it will bring about some changes. So thank you very much, everybody. It was lovely to have you here tonight, listen to me, and I wish you all the best going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nananchi, for such a very great presentation as well. I enjoyed it. Lots of insights, but also some practical perspectives that I think will really benefit and help all of us. Very insightful. Definitely stick around. Probably some people might have some follow-up questions to you, but now allow me to invite Stasio Valoi to come in and probably also make your presentation in 5 minutes. Over to you. And how is Mozambique?
Mozambique is good, and we've been having kind of tropical storm disease during the last times. This year as well is what has been happening almost, not almost ever here. So we are also facing the climate change. But I would like to start with a point where, in fact, not only in Mozambique, but in our region, or journalists in Africa, we started writing about our own story after we realized that many of the stories which were published outside in the Western world and so on were not exactly what was really happening. So we decided to come and tell our own stories. And this is what we've been doing until today. I'm in Mozambique, but I'm a part of a transnational network, and I do mainly transnational investigation from the Mozambique Investigative Journalism Center to Oxpecker to ZAM Magazine to Handle Report sometimes. So, I mean, it depends. We just follow the money. But I'll give you a clear example when we talk about the way how the people perceive about climate change when we're reporting it, and the way how they deal with it, and who mainly is the main responsible when we talk about it. I'm here talking about my eyes in this moment in Tete province, where there's the biggest coal mine in Mozambique, where there was a Brazilian company called Vale, and now it's with the Indian company called Vulcan. But at the end of the day, they do the same thing. It's a place where almost the entire city of Moatiz is being engulfed by the coal mine. You look to the sky is becoming kind of dark, or it's always almost dark because they are always blasting dynamite to explore coal. And a part of it, you look to the people's house, it's covered with dust, which is a result of this coal. The people in that side, they're no longer sitting outside to dine or to have a lunch because the dust goes direct to the plates. The other side, the people are getting sick because they have to breathe the air coming from, mixed with these dusts, which will end up having air pollution. We were sitting with them, and one of the questions was, we are here in Mozambique, wherever this foreign company is exploring here a coal, we have been affected health, economical, social, even human rights abuse. And it's not even a local company. We cannot even breathe here. So I told them, in fact, this is true, because those who are most polluting is the global north, a polluting global south. In fact, I even hate this word global north, global south. It's like kind of racism where you separate both sides, like those are the most privileged ones, and these ones are the ones who have to suffer. But in fact, this is what has been happening in South. So to say that several stories which we've been publishing, we meet people who have no knowledge in terms of climate change to avoid being biased. Because what we're having today, we have a lot of information. If we're not able to filter it, we end up come with a different narrative, which one end up benefiting those who, example, are polluting. We did expose several stories about, example, Total, where at the end of the day, we realize that they can even pay millions and millions of USD all for the marketing in order to bring a different narrative to a certain community where this community has to accept what is the aim. But fortunately, in some of the community where I did report, which we look to Palma today, even recently, the community people were telling Total to go out from Mozambique. And recently, in the Yemen province, where a Chinese company was trying to come with a seismic study, the community was able to tell, example, these companies that we are not interested in having this seismic study because we do have a Sasol, but since Sasol is here, we got nothing, brought us no benefit, if not the opposite. So people today, they do perceive, they do know exactly what is happening in terms of changing, that were really affected by tropical storms every year. They know that we are having climate change, The rain is no longer coming in the usual season, is more hot. But in the other side, is they're not really aware on how these biggest multinational associate with governments, consultants, non-GOs, which is you sometimes they're not even required to be working in Mozambique because you have a certain people, local people who are able to implement certain activities. So in our way of investigate, we try to combine all these elements and bring the information to the community in a different way, like telling stories about the community, but they are the ones telling us the story. We end up writing what they're telling us, of course, in a different way. And it's not an easy task. A part of funding issue we keep doing. The other situation, if you look in our case, is writing about climate issues, environment issues, end up playing with big sharks. And by playing with big sharks, you're also target. If you look to what happened with some journalists, including myself, is end up being threatened, end up being chased, but we keep doing. But one of the main things when I do my investigation, mainly
Okay, is it my issue or you can still hear Valoy? Estacio?
I think he cut out.
I also can't hear him. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Estacio, can you hear us? Estacio? Okay, maybe he can always come back and finalize his presentation. I think he had already tackled most of the things. If you can hear us, Estacio, definitely will switch to the final speaker. If you can allow us, and then we can also bring you towards the end or maybe during the Q&A. It looks like we can't hear you now. So, Nick, it's a pleasure to have you, and thanks for your patience and for waiting. Looking forward to hearing your presentation. You have the floor.
Thanks, Matthews, and hello, everyone. It's nice to be here. My name is Nick. I'm a global climate and environment reporter for AFP, international news agency headquartered in France. I'm Australian, but I've spent the last 2 years here in Paris, but 10 years before that reporting in, living in Kenya, India, and Indonesia. And at the moment, I specialize in 3 areas. One is covering UN multilateral negotiations. So that's obviously the COPs, the biodiversity ones, the climate ones particularly, and also the associated diplomatic gatherings with those, the Bonn sessions, plastic treaty negotiations, the upcoming fossil fuel phase-out conference, things like that. I also cover climate change in the courtrooms, ICJ hearings, for example, and cases where ordinary people are taking oil and gas companies to court for climate damages. And the third area is climate science. So IPCC reports, major studies in academic journals, major updates from Copernicus, from NASA, from the sort of global scientific institutions of credibility around climate science. I think the main theme that binds those 3 areas, and something that you may have encountered as well in your own reporting, is that these are sort of specialty areas, but we're non-specialists, right? I mean, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a legal scholar or a policy expert in the technical sense. I'm a journalist, and part of the trick and the difficulty in what we have to do in reporting on these themes for international or local audiences, wherever your audience may be, is trying to connect these big ideas in a clear way that resonate with ordinary people's sort of everyday experiences. Otherwise we sort of lose them. And I think to talk to the main point about COPs, I've covered several COPs now and many of their associated events, the negotiations that take place in the lead up to them. There's a lot of COP language. There's a lot of jargon in the bubble. It was something that Nanette actually mentioned earlier about the climate jargon. So you hear a lot of this language that's used that, unfortunately, I see it feeding its way into a lot of reporting on COPs. So people using terms like global stocktake or mitigation or NDCs. You know, this is the language that everybody uses at the COPs themselves, but that anybody outside the COP rooms, that doesn't mean anything to them. I mean, it's just a completely different language. So we're always under pressure from our editors to find the clearest possible way to explain in very clear language and accurately, of course, what those concepts mean. And you know, there are fairly straightforward. Sometimes it can be complicated, but if you give it some thought and some time, there are some fairly straightforward ways to just strip away that jargon. So instead of saying NDCs, you just say climate plans. Instead of saying mitigation, you say how countries are cutting pollution. Loss and damage becomes who pays when climate harms hit.
Your voice is noisy, very noisy.
My voice is very noisy?
It's a bit low.
Yes.
My voice is low, or it needs to be louder? Is it louder now?
Yeah, it's better now.
Okay, I'll hold this like this, just so that it's louder. So, for example, at COP29 in Azerbaijan, in Baku, the key focus of that COP was climate finance, which is obviously an issue of enormous importance for SIDS and LDC countries. A lot of the discussion there was around the NCQG. Now, if you know what that means, great. But I mean, most people who are maybe going to read about this summit in a newspaper, on a website, or on the radio, that acronym doesn't really mean anything to them. And so it was important to try to find ways to, you know, mention very clearly in a concrete way what that climate finance discussion could mean. So if the debate around that money means building a seawall somewhere in Tuvalu or in the Pacific or anywhere where there's rising seas, write that. I mean, make that point high up. You know, if it's about farmers having better access to drought-resistant crops, for example, make that point. Instead of saying climate finance or NCQG, you explain what those concepts mean with concrete examples. And I think the other issue is finding as well the right person to tell that story. It's something that some of the other speakers today have discussed already. But it can be a bit tricky at a COP when you may not have all the color you need to tell that story. There usually is, though, activists, youth leaders, and others from country delegations that accompany sort of the diplomatic side who can tell that story better than a few lines of jargon that might come from a formal delegate. So, you know, if you have a diplomat who says this COP has not fulfilled expectations on loss and damage, it's just kind of a standard sort of line you might hear. Instead of using that person, try to find someone who's going to say, you know, we don't have the money to prepare for what's coming, or this summit has failed to help the most vulnerable countries. There's ways that we can connect these bigger decisions with people back in your respective countries and readers everywhere, so that they don't feel like they're being spoken to in a different language, basically. And I know that we're all under time pressure. We all have editors wanting us to file more quickly with less resources. And as some people have already mentioned today, some of you are covering multiple subjects at once. I do think that editors will not mind if you take a bit more time if you're finding the right person to tell that story, as opposed to just pulling a few lines from a press release. I would say if the concepts are complicated, one thing that I've always tried to do is think about what the main topics are going to be at that conference or at that negotiation or in that courtroom or wherever it is you're going to be covering, or something to do with climate science. Think about those subjects, research them, and try to write clear, explanatory, everyday language descriptions of what they mean, so you're ready when it comes to filing. And if you're having trouble with phrasing those or framing those, I just try to find an expert. It could be, you could email somebody internationally, you could ask one of your local researchers, scientists, climate experts, whoever is going to be able to help you best to say, you haven't really phrased that quite right, or that's not really what the science says. If you have those paragraphs ready to go, it can make life a lot easier. And I've always found that experts are more than willing to help you if you're coming at them saying, I want to present this in the best possible way for an international audience. One last thing I'd say, I think, is about the opportunities for SIDS and LDC journalists. If you're trying to find ways to report from home, is to always try to connect these big global issues with something locally. It's obviously something many speakers have spoken about today, probably better than I will, but I want to stress what they've said, which is trying to find, a community that's dealing with, say, plastic pollution on their coastlines to illustrate what's happening in a negotiation room in Geneva or somewhere far away. Or people affected by extreme weather, if you're reporting about greenhouse gas emissions, is much better than just talking about greenhouse gas emissions. It helps tie those global events to local situations. With the oil crisis globally at the moment and the war in the Middle East, there are, cooking fuel shortages in Nepal. And there are also communities that are disconnected from fossil fuels because they've installed solar panels. So there's pros and cons stories to kind of tell there. One last thing would be climate litigation. I think the ICJ case last year showed the power of climate in the courtroom. These local cases where you may have, and the ICJ, of course, started in the Pacific, went all the way to Europe. There are many other examples of cases that are currently in European courtrooms that started in countries in the global south, from farmers and fishermen that have challenged these major fossil fuel companies. It's a very powerful way to illustrate the sort of David versus Goliath nature of these stories. Very compelling, and it resonates with people, and it underscores the impacts of climate change, of the losses and damage suffered in global south countries. And it's a very powerful way of addressing climate justice. So I think if you can keep an eye on cases locally that might be bubbling away, it's definitely a great way to tell this story. So I would sum up just by saying, avoid the jargon and avoid the process, find the right people to tell your story, ask for help if you need it, and try to connect those big global decisions to everyday realities. Thanks. Happy to take any questions if there are any, Matthews.
All right. Thank you so much, Nick, for that also great presentation. Great speakers, great session we've had today. I know, Estacio, you had you were ejected at some point. Now you're back. I'll give you just maybe 2 minutes to wind up, and then you can also begin to address some of the questions that are in the chat. If you accept, panelists and also participants, maybe we can aim to close this meeting by in the next 8 minutes. Yeah. So over to you, Estacio.
No, I think it's better we go straight to the questions.
To the questions. Okay. So please, is there any question you feel like you can tackle? I think I saw an interesting question, which is pretty much linked to. Okay, let me begin with the first one. From Innocent. do you think implementation is the biggest issue rather than policy? Yeah, and he's trying to give an example of Malawi, issues of coordination, governance, and things like that. What lessons can we get from other countries? Perhaps, Chris, you can try to address this, but also anyone else. And then another one following. Yeah, Thomas. Okay, thanks for following this. But definitely, Zambia, you're also here. Another question from Kondwani. What measures are being taken in order to bring to book climate injustice caused by air pollution? So the issue of accountability as well. And there's another one also from Edward. I would like to understand how we can hold companies accountable for climate-related impacts, especially when the effects only become visible years later and the companies responsible may no longer be maybe functional. So all issues of accountability. Yeah. Okay. Trapper Gambi, Movement for Environmental Action. My question centers on how mining sectors have contributed greatly to induced climate-related disasters as they have the ground exposed. How best are these mining companies, as well as the government department responsible for mining, to ensure that they're taken into maybe they're held accountable, I think, in other words. So I can start with Chris. You can also say your closing remarks, and then we'll move to the rest of the speakers also as we conclude. Thank you. Let's start with Chris.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can hear you, Chris. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, Matthews, I was off a little bit. Can you start over the question? I just came in when you're talking about the mining companies and stuff.
Okay. So maybe we can.
I did.
The questions are in the chat. Maybe we can start with Nick. You can respond to any of the questions and also your parting words. Yeah.
Sure. I don't mind.
Yeah,
I don't have much
I think
to say.
They're all policy-related questions.
Yeah, no. There's a lot of policy here. I would just say that on the accountability aspect of a number of these questions, it is true that trying to hold major companies, particularly perhaps companies that have been behaving unscrupulously or left environmental damage, there is a challenge to seeing results, I suppose you would say. The advisory opinion of the ICJ last year was sort of a groundbreaking moment, not just because of the fact that it was holding all governments of the world responsible for what's happening and saying they have a legal duty to protect people and future generations. It's a little more complicated, and you see far fewer cases that involve companies. But that's not. It's not a reason, I think, to think that pursuing these companies through solid ground reporting, where you're documenting what these companies are doing, how they are harming local communities, how they are damaging the environment, and perhaps the land on which people need to plant crops to survive their traditional homelands. There's cultural connections there. There's definitely cut through internationally with talking about the impact of a local act of environmental damage and how it fits into an international story of companies behaving unscrupulously. So I do think that journalism provides one of few mediums for being able to illustrate these stories and not letting these cases go unreported and unnoticed and bringing them to the attention of as many people as possible. It is one way to pursue accountability, as difficult as it may be to get that final result that you may be seeking in terms of climate justice. But it's part of this sort of slow process of, particularly in courts, there is a slow process that is happening internationally now, but it is happening, where judges are becoming more open to hearing broader cases about loss and damage and the responsibility of companies to protect the planet from, say, greenhouse gas emissions created from those companies. So I do think that, we do have a tool, being journalists, to pursue accountability.
Okay, thank you so much, Nick. I do agree with you entirely. I think as journalists, as media practitioners, definitely we have very powerful tools which we can use to push for accountability. Let me now move on to Isacho. Valoy, how do you wind up as you're also trying to respond to any of the questions that are in the chat?
Yeah, but this moving out, we as a journalist, we do what we have to do. We have those who are there to advocate, and they have the government. One of the main things is necessary that we, our civil society and so on, to tackle the issue on how this, if we don't change or if we don't shift the power, because the power is much more with the corporates, with the multinationals, where we end up giving to them, example, a mining concession, which was billions and billions, 75% of it, we keep 25. How are you going to bring them easy to accountability if inside your community they do whatever they want? If you try to take them to court, because the way how you did sign these contracts, you benefit them. So I mean, these kind of things can be changed, and in some places, as we could hear our colleague was saying, we're changing it. Total was taking example to court. We did. Was able with my team to take Gem Fields to court in London. So we do have tools to do it. The only thing, we keep working on it. So
Right.
that's all.
Thank you so much, Isacho, for that as well. Naneti, anything to say before we go to Chris? How do you wind up?
No,
But also,
no,
is there
nothing
anything
from
to
me.
respond?
Thank
Okay.
you.
All right. Thank you so much, Chris.
Yes, Matthews. I think my final statement would be that the media and journalists have a very big role to play in terms of addressing climate injustices, especially with respect to the mining sector. Taking a case, for instance, of Karekera, and a good reporting of what is happening is very, very important. At the moment, we are talking about a huge mining that is taking place in this country. And the journalists are the ones that are supposed to follow up on whether the companies and the government have made agreements. Those agreements are public documents. They're supposed to be unearthed. So journalists have to go get that information and follow up, because without following up, it is very difficult to report on how people are affected. And talking about reporting, I know that journalists also need support to go get the information, but this is also where they can work hand in hand with the civil society organizations in order to make sure that they are supported in getting the information. But what is important is the reporting, and whether where companies are not able to respond to the demands of the local people, then again, like Nika said, litigation is another way that is being provided even in our laws. So the civil society, local people, and the interest groups must work hand in hand to make sure that there's a response to climate injustices. So that would be my final concluding remarks. Thank you, Matthews.
All right. Thank you so much indeed. I do really appreciate. Lots of questions coming up, Liberia and other places, but unfortunately, we do not have all the time. Jabbar, anything to say before we close?
Nana, I don't want to put you too much on the spot, but there was one question in the chat I saw about how people could hold people to account, and I was wondering if you know the story of the Vanuatu, the students in the Pacific more intimately, if you could share any insights on that story in terms of how they were able to practically carry that all the way to the highest court, ICJ.
Nice court.
Do you have any insights?
Sure. Thank you. So sorry, I didn't have much of a role in that, but we were involved somewhat with providing technical advice and briefs But basically what it was, I guess, this is one of those examples, I guess, of David and Goliath in the Bible, where there were a group of students talking about what they could do, and then they thought of taking this legal action and taking this, I don't want to use the wrong terminology, sorry, but of taking this further to the International Court of Justice and pushing for an advisory opinion. And in doing so, it became an activity that had many layers of people. We had ministers and leaders on board from the Pacific, as well as these students who led everything. They did. So one of the things that we do at the climate conferences is we have a pavilion, the Moana Blue Pacific Pavilion, and we played one of their documentaries one year because they themselves filmed this whole process. They had video cameras and they filmed it from this very start, and they put together a short film about what they had done, and it was quite admirable. But basically, I guess it just showed that if you had an idea, and you have a lot of enthusiasm and energy, and they found a way to make it happen. They call upon the support of partners, like I said, the ministries, the Council of Regional Organizations of the Pacific, like mine, that has the environmental arm. There was also the social and cultural arm, as well as the Forum Secretariat. So there was a lot of rallying and support provided. But everything started by this group, and they took it further. Sorry, I haven't really prepared to talk a lot about that, but there is a short film out there. We do work with a lot of these young people, and we're continuing to do so. There are other challenges now, which is why I think we really need to make sure that this remains at the forefront before it gets forgotten as well. But like I said, it all started up from one of the universities of the South Pacific, the law school. Students were discussing about an assignment, and then they took it further from there. So it's an interesting story outside of, what the impact, how it all began. But I think it is inspirational. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nanette.
Sorry, Jabal. Thanks.
You did a great job. Don't worry. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
On my side, I just want to really thank all our speakers, Nanette, Estacio, Nick, Chris. You were excellent. You're really practical, which I really love in terms of providing just real points on how journalists can improve their game. We really appreciate the time you took to share with us on some of those practical things about acronyms and demystifying these complicated terms. I myself did some communication work on behalf of AOSIS. So I've been on the other side of it, Nick, in terms of preparing those press releases and trying to make it digestible for a general audience. I know the struggle very well. But yeah, thank you to our panelists. In terms of next steps, we're going to share the recording and the presentations as we have them. Maybe we'll see if we could get any of the questions in chat that Chris might want to take. We might see if we could provide some fuller answers, and we share that with you as well. And just, yeah, I think we frame this webinar as a media training, but I think bigger than that, I think a lot of you are already doing this type of work and have experience in doing this type of work. So it's not like we're training you. I think that's a misnomer, but it's an opportunity to sort of realize that there are other people, you have colleagues doing this as well. So it gives you the chance to feel like you're not alone. I think that is the bigger gain from it. I think we had some really good examples of persons who are doing it in the field to the best degree that you could take lessons from. And I think it was really successful in that aspect. So thank you so much for taking the time to be part of this webinar with us, and we will try to follow up with other things in the pipeline. Anything else, Matthews, that you have to share before we go?
No, thank you so much, Jabbar. Nick, Estacio, we really appreciate for joining. Hopefully we can stay in touch, and all our participants, thank you so much. Thanks for dropping your email addresses. Definitely we'll stay in touch. Otherwise, we can stop here for now. It's been very interesting, but also exciting to have you all around. Goodbye for now. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.